Good afternoon. This is Torah on Parashat Ki Savo in Sefer Devarim. This parsha begins with Moshe commanding that when Bnei Israel entered the land, and they should bring Bechoros, the first fruit offerings of all the crops, and they shall bring it to a place that Hashem will choose, which means the base of Mikdash later on, first the Mishkan, later the base of Mikdash, the temple. And in addition, they when they offered their crops, they said that each individual, while he brings his crops, has to give them to the Kohen, and he has to take a whole statement. And after that, it's Moshe says that they will be satisfied and be happy. It also commands that in the third year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, what they have to do is they have to give an offering, a special Meiser offering to the poor. And Moshe then promises if they take part in everything that they're commanded, they'll be rewarded, have a great life. But it also says when they come into land of Israel, they're going to set up great stones, and all the words of the Torah are going to be written on the stones. They then said, when they cross, they're going to go to 2 mountains, Mount Ebal, and the other one's going to be Mount Gerizim. And they're half the tribes, Levium, are going to read certain curses, and the certain tribes are going to say Amen, and there are also going to be certain blessings. And most of the rest of the Torah portion promises all the rewards we will get if we follow Hashem's commandments. Now, interestingly enough, there's relatively few. There are a few lines. In fact, it goes on for 14 psukim. Then, for another 52 psukim, they are going to be going on to all the curses. 65 psukim. They're going to be going on to curses. And now these, unlike the ones in Parshas Kusai, these are going on what happened in the time of the second exile, after the second temple was built, and where they were eventually exiled by the Romans. And the Parsha completes with it reminds what Hashem did for us against the 2 kings, Og and Sikon, and what will have, just like that, he will guard us against when we go in to conquer the land. Now, what I would like to focus on today is part of the statement that the Bnei Israel made, Jewish people, when they we're going to bring their first fruit offerings. And it says, Anita, this is Pasuk K, Vamrata, Lifnei, Adonai, Laheka, Arme, Oved, Avi, Yered, B'Mitzrayma, V'Yagar Sham, B'Mitzay, Ma'at Yehu, Shamgoy, Gadol, Atzom, L'Rav. And what it says is, then you shall call out and say before Hashem your God, an Aramean tried to destroy my forefather. he descended to Egypt and sojourned there, few in numbers, and then he became a nation great, strong, and enormous. Now, many interpretations say, who's this Aramean? It's Lavan. Now, Lavan was the brother of Rivka Menu, Yitzhak's wife, and was the father of the daughters that Yaakov ultimately married, Rachel and Leah, and also the two other wives that came were maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah. Now, question I have here, why is it that Lavan is considered the worst of the enemies, that we say it here because of him? You know, if you really want to look at it, let's look at the events. Yaakov got the brachas away from Esav, based on a nebuah that Rivka got from Hashem, and he fled because Esav was after him. In fact, Esav sent his son Eliphaz to kill him instead of killing Yaakov. What did he do instead? He took all his property, which should say a person who's totally poor is as if they were dead. And another question, why didn't Esav go and get Yaakov himself? Because as fierce as he was, Yaakov, before he went to Lavan's house, had been learning Torah for 14 years in the yeshiva Shem and Ever. And if he, without that, he would not have been able to survive Lavan. As vicious as Esav was, he would have been enslaved by the trickery of Lavan, his uncle, and he would have never gotten out of there. So that's why he kept a very great distance. But that still doesn't answer the question of why Lavan? What did he do that was so bad? Yes, he was a deceiver, but if you look at it on a deeper level, the whole development of the Jewish people was impacted upon by him down to today's world even. Now, what's the first thing Lavan did? The first thing Lavan did is Yaakov worked 7 years for Rachel as a wife. He waited 7 long years. And then on the wedding night, Leah took her place. Now Rachel gave the signs that Yaakov and Leah had developed, Rachel had developed, so her sister wouldn't be embarrassed. And also, of course, she realized prophetically tribes had to, some of the tribes, the children of Yaakov had to come through Leah. Rachel did an incredible thing because for all she knew, she might have stayed single the rest of her life. And so she gave up everything. Now, the question is, so instead, Yaakov thought he was with Rachel, he was actually with Leah. Now, this started a whole chains of events. Now, first of all, according to what was originally supposed to happen, it said that if Yaakov had married Leah first, without all the trickery, he would not have wanted Rachel. Now, that has to be understood on a number of levels, but basically, what it means is he could have had both wives. They could have been both could have been a harmonious situation. Now, according to that, if he had married Rachel and then Leah, it wouldn't have been a problem. So what happened when it was reversed the other way? One problem is it changed the whole orders of the tribes, because it says in the Chumash that Leah was a hated wife actually meant Yaakov loved her less. Hashem blessed her with children first, and only after she had 10 of the 10 of 12 tribes produced by her, 6 and 2 each by Bilhah and Zilpah, did Rachel finally have a child. Now, that in itself created some very big problems. First of all, what did it cause? The firstborn child turned out to be Reuven. Now, because of that, as Yaakov said when he gave the blessings later on, Reuven was my first koach, my first strength, yet, but he was unstable like water, because the intentions and the understanding of a couple when they're conceiving a child can influence the nature of the child. And here, even though Yaakov was totally innocent and really thought he was with Rachel, but was instead with Leah, that created an instability. And that instability was going to have consequence in itself when he grew up. Now, there's another problem. By changing what could have been the order of Rachel marrying first and then Leah, if that had happened, Leah would not have been the hated wife. Rachel would have been, could have had the firstborn child. Now, if Rachel had the firstborn child, Yosef, then none of the brothers would have been jealous, because it would have been normal for him as the elder, the oldest, to be the leader in matters of betrayal, in matters of spirituality, and there would be nothing wrong with him being ultimately the king. By changing that order, it led to the situation later on where when Yosef had his dreams, because he was number 11 and not number 1, the brothers became resentful. That ultimately led to the exile in to Egypt, all that came from it, which is alluded to in this pasuk. Now, the whole relation between Rachel, Leah, Laban, and Yaakov, and also the whole story of Yosef and his brothers, I'll be speaking about in the Torahs and Parshas and Sefer Bereshis in more detail. In any event, that was a second problem. That was another problem. Now, Reuven was the firstborn, but he was unstable. What did he do because of that instability? After Leah died, Yaakov's bed, I'll explain more about that, was moved into Bilhah's tent and not into Leah's. Reuven became insulted and then said he was with Bilhah. Now that can have two meanings. One, that he was literally, one opinion Gemara Yibam says he was literally with Leah, with Bilhah. The other opinion says by moving the bed, he got into his father's privacy. It's as if he had been with Bilhah. Either way, what was the greatest significant impact of that? Now, if you look, before they went up to Bethel, Shem said there was going to be a new breed with Yaakov. Now, that new breed usually meant there should have been more children. Now, what would have happened if Reuven hadn't moved the bed? Now, the bed, as it shows in chapter 49, was not actually the bed of Yaakov, but a special bed, so to speak, that the Shekhinah appeared on, Hashem's presence, and indicated to Yaakov which wife he was supposed to be with that night. By moving it, the Shekhinah did not appear over Bilhah's tent. If it had, that night they would have conceived twins. Now, who would those twins have been? those twins would have been Ephraim and Manasseh, who later became Yosef's sons instead. Now, what factor did Ephraim and Manasseh represent? They represented the ability to survive in exile. And as my teacher, Ozia Molesky Ziklan Sadak Babraka said, if that had been the case, then what would have happened? What would have happened then is we either would not have had to go into exile, because we already had that factor, which later had to go through Yosef, Aznat, and wound up with Ephraim and Manasseh being born there. Either we wouldn't have had to go to exile, it would have been a very different kind of exile. We would not have had to go through the punishments to slavery, because even if we had to go, couldn't have stayed in the land of Canaan, the Ben Hashem's will, we would have all stayed in the land of Goshen, learning Torah. We would not have assimilated with the Egyptians. The slavery would not have been needed, and it would have been a whole different story. Now, that was the next thing that led from Lavan's actions. Now, finally, Lavan did another step. What was that other step? That other step was he, it said after he met with Yaakov and Hashem to warn him not to confront him or say anything to him, good or bad, it said he went back to his makom. Now, going back to one's makom place can mean one of two things. It can mean that they're either geographically returning to their home, or as it did with Balaam when it said return to their place, it can mean to their old ways. Now, what was the old ways? According to the Midrash Sutta, it explains that Lavan sent a letter to Esav explaining that good-for-nothing brother of yours stole my daughters, stole my maidservants, stole my sheep, my grandchildren, my cattle, it stole everything. So Esav said, okay, I was going to forgive him, but now that I see he hasn't changed his ways, he stole my blessings, now he's doing all this, I'm going to go get him. In the same time, Lavan sent a letter to Rivka, his sister, saying, you better tell Yaakov to pacify Esav because he's got blood in his eye, neglecting the fact that he had caused the whole problem in the first place. Now, that led to a further consequence. Because of the hostile well Esav approached with 400 men, Yaakov hid Dinah, his daughter. Now, if he hadn't hid Dinah, his daughter, Dinah, if she had married Esav, probably could have turned him to good. Esav and Yaakov would no longer have been enemies, and the fourth exile we're now living in for the last 2,000 years, that of Esav and Rome would not have occurred. So for all of those reasons, Lavan impacted on us in tremendous ways. Now that's Derek Parashat, which means the plain meaning of the pasuk. Now I'd like to briefly go into another meaning where it says, in verse 5, it's a very different translation. This is based on the Baruch Chaim Kodesh. Ve'ina amrat lifnei Hashem elokeka arami oved avi yered b'Mitzrayim bigar sham b'mitzay ma'at v'hisham l'goy gadol atzum l'rav Then he translates it, then you shall speak up and say before Hashem your God, my forefather, meaning Yaakov, was a wandering Aramean. Lavan doesn't figure in this equation. He descended to Egypt and sojourned there. Few in numbers, he became a nation great, strong, and numerous. Now, what it's talking about is something else. That, in other words, it's explaining that if even Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov been just judged by strict justice, they could not have survived the judgment, because nobody can be righteous before Hashem is pure, even the Avot. So, what is this talking about? It says, the Torah therefore says, Shia Tshuva Hetzlacha, upon greeting the presence of Hashem in the upper Gan Eden, one should give an answer by Hashem for not having fulfilled his will. That why? Umrama Aniti Amri Lifnei Hashem Over Avi. That is when it says, then you shall answer and say before Hashem, your God, an Aramean destroyed my forefather. Army is Yetzah, and who is this army? Aramean. It's not Laban in this interpretation. Who's it referring to? Arami refers to the Yetzah Hara, who was a great trickster. Ramai, he's a Ramai. That's a form of the word of Arami, and that's who we're talking about. Now, who is this? That's the snake. The story of Adam and Chava. And for it tricks people into committing aveiros and destroying them. And it says, an Aramean, this trickster, destroyed my forefather. We're not talking about Yaakov, we're referring to Adam Arishon, first man. And it says, Adam sinned, Avdu Begarim, Misa Ladoros, Be'im Acharav. And the Yetzirah and his servants destroyed him, bring an element of death to the world and all succeeding generations. And that caused evil to take place in human souls. And he destroyed my father. He tried to shake up faith, meaning the original one. And another meaning is destroyed my father. Shehi Neshuma. So my father refers to the soul. What is Satan trying to do? He's trying to destroy the soul so we'll not serve it with Hashem. And when it talks that he's going to descend to Egypt, literally Egypt, what it's talking about is the domain of the Yetzer Hara. And it goes on from there. I'm going to be speaking more about this because this quote appears in the Pesach, the Haggadah of Pesach, and I'll be giving a share on that also. But in any event, the important thing is here, we're talking about the battle of the human race against the Yetzer Hara. And if you look at it, these two meanings, even though they're very different, one's talking on a Parashat level, the actual levels, others talking a deeper meaning. If you look at it, they're really connected. How are they really connected? Because what happened is all of these forces various cases with Lavan, with the whole business with Esau, and how the brothers later traded Yosef, which wound up leading down to us going into slavery. All this was powered and fueled by the Yetzer Hara, which also led us to Mitzrayim. So in the literal sense, as well as this sense, it's very important to note that, in other words, our job is to fight that Yetzer Hara, explain to Hashem we're doing the best with those circumstances, look at the merits we do have when we're coming to Rosh Hashanah, and then for a month of Elul when we're trying to process things, and also after acknowledging our positives, not let the snake, the Yetzer Hara, weaken us, then realize what we have to correct, so that we may all be blessed for a good year, the end of the current war, and for the ultimate redemption. Good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.